Hey, Daddy, this is the man of the champions, Bill Fonzie Alfonso, giving a shout out to something else. Something else, Daddy.
This is Nickel Matata, Great Warrior Wolf, and you are listening to Something Else.
I'm Tony Cini, and you're listening to Something Else.
Hey everybody, it's Rich Palladino, the voice of New England, and you are listening to Something Else with Arya.
And welcome to episode number 123, kid, of Something Else. My name is Arya, and feast your ear holes on this week's episode because it's Wednesday. That means it's TNA, and that means I'm being joined by my co-hostess with the co-mostess. It's Cyndi. Cyndi, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. I hate football.
Why do you hate football?
Patrick Mahomes. He only got me 12 points in fantasy. You're supposed to be the best QB on earth. Play like it. Get 50 touchdowns.
See, I thought you were going to tell me you were a Ravens fan.
No,
I don't even know who your team is. Who is your team?
I'm a free agent.
Okay. But I don't know how many points it came out to, but Josh Allen had 2 passing touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns today. So I'd like to think that came out to more than 12 points.
Yep.
All right. So, as we mentioned last week, TNA in 2002 is still on hiatus because this is the anniversary of 9/11 here on 9/11. So they didn't have a pay-per-view at all. Best of pay-per-view, no episode of Explosion in its place, no nothing. So, since we're trying to keep with the same this date in history and didn't just want to take 2 weeks off the show, we went into the future to discuss the best damn sports show period, and specifically there are 2 episodes about TNA from November of 2004. Last week we did the first show, which was one of the worst episodes of a pro wrestling show in the history of pro wrestling. And this week's show is better in the sense that it is not one of the worst shows of all time, but it was still, in my opinion, pretty bad.
Yeah, these past 2 weeks, you could consider Cindy's revenge.
Why would you say that? Because I forced you to watch the Dup Cup and every other thing we've seen so far?
Pretty much.
I can't accept that. However, I will say that while this was still a bad show, if you told me that this was the show you watched, that, you were like, okay, I'm going to start watching this TNA stuff, I'd give you a pass on that.
Mm-hmm.
Last week's show, I was questioning your 2004 sanity. This week's show, it's like, okay, it's different. I'll give that to you. But so this show was taped October 27th, 2004, but aired November 11th, 2004. Despite that, we're still going to be using our 2002 timeline when we discuss Jerry Jarrett's book. Because as we mentioned last week, Jerry Jarrett has discovered that his publicist has a family who has money. And Panda Energy is in the process of buying 51% of TNA. So this week in Jerry Jarrett's book, Cyndi, do you remember those emails that your grandmother would forward you back in the mid-2000s telling you about some wacky church story that definitely happened about how some person was saved by Jesus?
Plays grandmother with mom, and yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, Jerry got forwarded that email this week, and he proceeded to put it in his book. This is the same book.
Jerry is a weird man.
This is the same book that has a 40-plus page interview that he did over the summer smack dab in the middle of it. By the way, the spam email he received made him cry. So then we're going to rant a little bit here about Jerry Jarrett. Now, we've ranted since the beginning of this show about how Jerry Jarrett was convinced that they could do 50,000 buys every week. And no matter how much proof he was being shown, he was still convinced that they could still do 50,000 buys a week. It gets better than that because he is sending the financial information to Panda Energy, which includes the accounts receivable, the monies that they're owed that they haven't actually received yet. And Jerry Jarrett, through no concrete evidence, because he's been told that the numbers for even the first shows haven't even been finalized yet. So with no concrete evidence, he is sending Panda Energy paperwork implying that every pay-per-view they've done, all 11 of them so far, have brought in, in his terms, at least $110,000 per show, which I did the math. It's approximately 27,500 pay-per-view buys every week. They are not doing 27,500 buys a week. Now, you might be like, well, Arya, he's using an idea of like an estimate. He's using the DirecTV estimate that he's getting and basing it off that. I would give you a little bit of a pass on that, except a few weeks ago when Jerry realized the shit was hitting the fan, he got told by In Demand that the first 3 weeks were totaling about 50,000 buys, which, in case you're not very good at math, 27,500 times 3 is a lot more than 50,000.
82,500 to be precise.
Yeah. So I am waiting for the chapter that assuredly is coming up, where Panda Energy discovers what they're really getting, or what they really did, and the amount of money that's really happening, and the ensuing chaos. And obviously this doesn't happen, but if I was Panda Energy and I found out that I was duped, by this person who told me differently, I'd pull the fucking financing then. And also, I'd like to believe that Bob Carter must have realized what bullshit that was, because if they were sitting back knowing that they're going to get at least $110,000 per show, so that's give or take about $1.2 million that they're owed. In theory, if these numbers are correct. So if I'm Panda Energy, I'm sitting back going, they don't need my money. This is temporary financing. The second they get their money, they're going to buy us out. And then, what the hell is the point of this? So Bob Carter must have really fucking loved his daughter, is all I'm going to say, because this whole thing just seems so asinine and fraudulent that I cannot imagine anybody financing this. Like, maybe it was just a tax write-off for Panda Energy. Maybe
ding, 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 ding.
That's the best I'm getting here, because there's nothing that's been on this show that has made me, when we're talking about the business of the shows, that made me think that Panda Energy, that Jerry Jarrett is a smart person to do business with. And it's funny because Jerry Jarrett's always been you always hear the stories that Jerry Jarrett was the only person Vince McMahon was ever afraid of as a promoter. And if Vince was actually afraid of Jerry Jarrett, goddamn, that'd be the biggest fraud that Jerry Jarrett's ever been able to perpetrate on the wrestling business. Because,
that reminds me of that line from WKRP in Cincinnati when Mrs. Carlson, the owner of the station, wanted to change the format because they were getting successful. It's not the plus, the minus. It's the plus and the plus if the minuses are played correctly. I think in the eyes of Bob Carter, TNA was not supposed to make money. They're set up to lose. And he was fine with that because the tax write-off. With that tax write-off, if any of his other businesses were not doing so well, and I'm of the belief that they were doing well, it's a fucking energy company in Texas.
They were probably making a few dollars at the time.
Yeah.
Do you think we can use the Freedom of Information Act to seize Panda Energy's tax returns from 2004 to 2016, whenever they finally sold Anthem?
We're not journalists, so we can't do that.
Probably not.
And is Panda Energy a private company or a publicly funded company?
I honestly have no idea. I imagine they're probably private because we've never heard a Panda Energy thing, even when they were owned by TNA.
So that would mean
TNA,
those are not available under the Freedom of Information Act.
God damn it, Freedom of Information Act. By the way, so the Panda Energy deal technically is not done yet because Health South has to talk to Jerry Jarrett for 5 minutes and agree to the buyout. The problem with that is Health South may have more important things to do right now since they're in the process of going out of business and having their little run-in with the federal government. So obviously, Health South did not have more important things to worry about than Jerry Jarrett wanting to finalize a business deal.
I figure that Health South probably wanted to do that just to get that off the books.
Well, I mean, undoubtedly, but I mean, they were also, again, busy with other shit.
Is anybody that Jerry Jarrett, business-wise, Health South, Panda Energy, are they not numbnuts or something?
I
now,
don't know.
Panda, I can understand because Bob Carter loves his daughter so much. And he really loves his daughter. Otherwise, I don't think TNA lasts beyond 2002.
Yes, we're talking about the 2004 shows. What most people don't remember was Panda Energy was threatening to pull out at the end of 2004, but both Dusty Rhodes and Jeff Jarrett were able to convince them otherwise, because Bob Carter had made the decision to sell the company, but they were convinced not to.
I think Bob Carter saw, hey, they got a special on the Best Damn Sports Show, period. How many eyeballs are they getting? 500,000? It's pretty damn good.
He probably watched these shows, and that's when he decided to pull the plug.
Yep.
So the show begins with Chris Rose recapping part 1. If you want to hear us rip apart that show, listen to last week's show. Before we go to the Impact Zone to introduce the 5 hosts to the same fans who saw them do this for the first show because it was taped the same day. Thankfully, though, they do not go to the ring for a 15-minute interview segment, and instead they do their intro from the Spanish announce desk. Chris Rose was wearing the Terry Taylor robe that Terry would eventually sell to Robert Roode. And he wore it the entire show, which is kind of funny that he would bother to wear that.
Hold on, I got the full getup. He's got a feather boa. I have it written down here. Show opens up with Best Damn Crew, and Chris looks like a complete idiot. He's got a feather boa, Bobby Roode's ring robe, awful sunglasses, and is wrestling his fake shirt. If you ever want the stereotypical, hey, I'm a sitcom wrestler guy, and I have never watched an actual wrestling show before, that's your look.
Complete with the wrestling is fake shirt.
Exactly.
We then get a hilarious segment where Tom Arnold does the things you wouldn't say to Puppet the Psycho Dwarf, and Tom Arnold calls him short. It was hilarious.
He had a couple decent ones in there. Like, The only ring that you deserve to be wrestling in is an onion ring.
That was like the third or fourth short joke he made, and I was like, by that point, I was just tuning him out.
Yeah, but let's get rid of that. So we got bagpipe music.
Yes, bagpipes played because it's time for Piper's Pit. Now, at WrestleMania 1, Piper had an entire pipe and drum band. At the Best Damn Wrestling Event period, he had a lone bagpiper who may or may not have actually been playing. Because I don't, if he was playing, obviously playing music over the PA system is going to be a lot louder than one sole person playing the bagpipes.
Oh, we'll talk about the audio issues later.
Oh, we get a very WCW TNA moment. But by the way, Roddy Piper, who is not the most up-to-date current person, made a topical reference for October 2004. He said that he's no Ashley Simpson and would not be lip syncing. Because, yes, that moment where Ashley Simpson was lip syncing on Saturday Night Live was 4 days before this was taped. So this was probably the most topical reference Roddy Piper made post 1986. Then, in a moment that I watched, and if you told me didn't happen, I'd believe you, Johnny Fairplay came out.
Oh, he's been with the company since the beginning of the year.
Oh, I know, but I, like, literally, I forget, like, I had no memory of him coming out during this segment. And we'll get to something even bigger than Johnny Fairplay in the I can't believe this happened later on. But Johnny Fairplay of Survivor, in case, no idea who he is, because, I mean, it is 2024, so it's possible some people may not know who the fuck Johnny Fairplay is. But he's the guy who went on Survivor and lied about his grandmother dying. But he comes out and somehow, like, I think this got edited all to hell, even more so than, anything else, because Piper starts trying to book Chris Rose versus Johnny Fairplay as a match. Instead, he then sprays a fire extinguisher on Fairplay, and Rose does the most awkward body slam in wrestling history to Fairplay before Piper sprays him with the fire extinguisher as well. And that 3 seconds of him spraying Chris Rose is what's on the 50 greatest moments in TNA history DVD.
Wow. Now, just a little bit from Fairplay. He made some appearances. Now, for those wondering, what the hell is Survivor Guy doing on TNA? Is he just using his Survivor fame just to get into the wrestling business? Not really, but it helped. Fairplay has been trained in professional wrestling since 1998.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so he was working independence as Johnny Fairplay. That was his wrestling gimmick, and he brought that into Survivor. He then managed to elevate that into getting back into more prominent wrestling. He did TNA off and on in 2004, mainly the weekly pay-per-views. I don't know if he appeared on Impact or not. But
I don't remember if he was on Impact, but he was on the pay-per-views because they do this god-awful angle that hopefully we are not still doing the show in 3 years to talk about. But they do a pay-per-view to pay-per-view to pay-per-view angle where Tracy Brooks, Trinity, and Johnny Fairplay are all fighting over who was going to be Dusty Rhodes' assistant. And so it leads to Dusty telling all three of them to go find a tag team. And like Tracy, I think Tracy was the person who got the Harris twins. Trinity got Phi Delta Slam. And Johnny Fairplay, he spent the entire show trying to find somebody. The only people he could find were like Lex Luger and Buck Quartermain. And he lost. And the only reason why he kept coming back on the show was because Dixie Carter liked him.
Oh, she was a massive reality show, especially a Survivor fan. So, fun fact, remember in 2009 where the worst match ever happened?
Yes, I do.
Guess how much Jenna got paid?
More than Gail Kim asked to stay at the time?
$500,000.
See, I would not completely disagree with that because I'm reading, like, this is a quote by Johnny Fairplay a few years later. And he said, I signed a $150,000 contract with TNA Wrestling for a year. I ended up doing 8 appearances for a total of 40 minutes. Then I signed a second contract and they didn't use me. So I'd like to thank them for $300,000 for 40 minutes worth of work.
He also showed up in one of the most unusual moments of Ring of Honor history.
I actually do remember that.
Yeah, it was him and Daniel Puder.
Yep.
And I don't know who beat them up, but
this sounds like a Mad Libs Wrestling edition. On a Ring of Honor show, Daniel Puder and Johnny Fairplay came out. Like, what are the most 3 random things you could say? And that actually happened.
I think Fairplay, I think his shtick works as a manager. But 2004 TNA had a lot of turnover. Now, we talked about 2002 TNA having turnover. 2004 TNA had amazing turnover.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So I noted, and this ends up being the least of their worries. They do a still ahead promo so you can see all the matches and whatnot are still coming. And they show highlights of every match that's about to happen, which exposes that the show is not live in any way. Again, that ended up not being that big of a deal, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Leanne Tweeden, who is the blonde girl of the Best Damn Sports Show period host, she interviews Team Canada, Scott D'Amore, Eric Young, and Bobby Roode, which was just D'Amore. D'Amore cuts a promo on John Sally before doing the Scott D'Amore bark to the camera, which, if you watched any of the old TNA shows, you remember Scott D'Amore doing that on every fucking show.
Yep.
He also had.
You're forgetting one thing. Oh, you're going to mention it. Go ahead.
He also had a goatee, which I have no memory of ever having a goatee. Was that not what you were going to mention?
Oh, no. That was not what I was going to mention.
He took the facial hair that Bobby Roode didn't have at the time.
Right. At the beginning of the interview, Scott D'Amore asked if her low-cut blouse and outfit is the standard for interviewers. Tweeden says, yeah. He, in his best Canadian accent, goes, only in America. Which...
Yeah, I thought you were going to bring up that Shane Douglas comes out later and he's not wearing a low-cut blouse.
No, we'll get to that later. Also, I just want to go back a little bit to the end of the extinguisher spot.
Mm-hmm.
Tom bags on Chris's physique after Chris rips off the wrestling is fake shirt. And it's Rich coming from the least in shape guy of the Best Damn Sports Show period crew.
I don't know. I think Brian Cox would have given him a run for his money on that one.
Ooh, is that are you thinking about that before or after you saw Brian Cox's match?
After. Now,
I'll
keep
take
on.
that bet.
Brian Cox is far more athletic, but I don't think Cox had much of a body here. But anyway,
how many athletic football players didn't have much of a body to look at, but were excellent in their craft?
Tony Saragusa is the first one that came to mind. He was
perfect.
He was pretty fucking big.
Yep.
So we get a match that is kind of has a funny footnote on the surface, and then the match just, oh my god. It's BG James and Conan with John Sally. Because you remember last week, John Sally lost horse to 3 Live Crew, so now he has to be their manager. Versus Eric Young and Bobby Roode versus Scott D'Amore in their corner in a flag match. Now,
And this is cocky Eric Young in 2004.
yes, this is before he becomes afraid of his pyro.
Yeah.
Now, I should point out that in TNA canon at this point, 3 Live Crew are the World Tag Team Champions of the world, which they had won by beating Team Canada at Victory Road, which was after this show was taped before it aired. So to the fans watching the show live, Team Canada are the champions, but on TV, 3 Live Crew are the tag team champions. It doesn't matter because nobody had a belt. And actually, and I could be wrong, but I don't think anybody had a belt on this show. So even though I talked about last week about them giving away the results of Victory Road, technically no one was wearing a belt. So the fans may not have known, even though you could figure it out at the time.
Jarrett did in the intro of show 1, but that was the only time a belt was shown. I mean, the X Division champion, who at the time was Petey Williams, he didn't have his belt, and Petey retained.
Yep. It's not like AJ came out with it to throw the fans off or something.
No, AJ didn't have it.
So Team Canada had the Canadian flag. 3 Live Crew had the NWA flag, which at least helps since Conan is Mexican and not American. But I was more like, are Team Canada not part of the NWA now? Now, okay, this match, I don't know who fucked up what here, but somebody fucked up something. I could be wrong, but my assumption was 3 Live Crew would try to get the Canadian flag, even though it doesn't make sense, and Team Canada would try to get the American flag or the NWA flag. But then that got stashed because the BG James shimmies up the ropes to try something heroic, which was to get the NWA flag. But he gets thrown out of the ring. So I'm like, okay. So, 3 Live Crew is going to try to get the NWA flag. Team Canada is going to try to get the Canadian flag. Perfect. Scott D'Amore then climbs the ropes to try to get the NWA flag. John Sally, by the way, was standing on the steps outside the ring, and John Sally is already a foot taller than everybody else, but him standing on the steps was just insanely ridiculous how much bigger he was than everybody else. And then when Scott D'Amore was going for what's either the right flag or the wrong flag, depending on what the rules of this match actually were, Sally throws a football at D'Amore, which didn't make any sense either. Was it a basketball? I thought it was a football.
No, it was a basketball. I mean, Sally wouldn't know what to do with a football.
That's why I was confused about why he would be throwing a football. So that makes at least a little bit more sense. He throws a basketball at D'Amore. D'Amore gets crotched. BG gets the NWA flag, which is apparently enough for him to win.
This was a 2-minute match. It kind of needed to be 4.
I know you're supposed to turn your brain off with that one, but oh my God. Who was supposed to get what flag? I guess it didn't matter at the end because no one said anything. But they were both fighting over the NWA flag. Then we got the top 5 finishers in TNA wrestling.
All right, let's go through these in order.
Yeah. So this is TNA 2004, and they have a lot of cool moves. The X Division's being a big thing. And I'll get to it later, but actually my favorite, or one of my favorite moves, isn't even on the list. But we'll get to that here. Number 5.
Ballard 630?
Actually, no, but that also would beat at least one move on this list. Number 5. So the 5th biggest move or best move or most impressive move in TNA history, the Canadian Destroyer. You know what? It would be number 1 if I was putting this thing together, but it deserved to be on this list because that's a fucking crazy ass move. And I don't know how the hell Petey Williams came up with that, but he both deserves a bonus and a fine for that. Number 4, the Styles Clash. So I'm like, okay, that I would argue it's not cooler than the Canadian Destroyer, but I get it, Styles Clash, that should be on the list. That should definitely be on the list.
Yeah.
Number 3, the Pounce. That should definitely be on the list. Is Monty Brown coming, from the opposite corner and giving somebody a running shoulder tackle and the jobber going flying, that's a pretty fucking cool finish.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay. Number 2 is Jeff Hardy's senton. Now it's like, okay, I'll still give it to them. It's like, okay, it's like Jeff Hardy doing the senton. That's still pretty cool. That's kind of a cool move. So now it's like, I'm sitting here like, okay, we've had the Canadian Destroyer, the Styles Clash, the Pounce, and the senton. What's the number 1 move? And I'm like racking my head. I'm like, is it like AMW's death sentence? I'm like, that's not like, I don't know if I'd say that's cooler than any of the other moves, but it's like, okay, like I think like I had resigned myself to like, okay, it's AMW because this whole thing is about putting over, the hot young stars of TNA. And so here we go. The tag team champions, the death sentence is going to be number 1, right? Right?
Nope.
It's
the stroke.
The fucking stroke. For new viewers who somehow have never seen Jeff Jarrett do this, it's the skull crushing finale without the full Nelson beginning of it. It's a side Russian leg sweep where they move forward instead of backwards. That is the greatest finisher in TNA history.
I mean, you can kick out of all 4 of the previous ones, but you're not kicking out of the stroke.
Which is funny because no one ever kicked out of the Canadian Destroyer when Petey Williams did it. Just saying.
That is how protected that move is.
To this day, Petey, okay, he was in TNA before the pandemic, like 2018, 2019. He may not have won a whole lot, but if he hit the Canadian Destroyer, the person did not kick out. Somebody made the save. But, I know at this point, I'm just, it's going to be my argument every time I ever see the Canadian Destroyer.
Makes sense to me.
So they did those over the course of the show, and we just plopped them in right here because this is when it first got mentioned. But it made perfect sense with the next segment, because the next segment is Tom Arnold interviewing fans before the show, where he implied the fans were both gay and virgins. And then he talked to a bunch of kids and one adult who he asked them who their favorite wrestlers were, and they said Sting and Hulk Hogan, neither of whom are on this show. Neither of whom are.
Sting worked TNA.
Yeah, but he worked TNA twice up to this point. This is before his big run, because his run isn't for another year plus. It's the closest we got to Hogan was Jarrett flying across the world to hit him with a guitar. And oh Lord.
At least the kid stuff was kind of cute, and I gave that a pass.
Again, Jeff Jarrett thought that this was an okay segment to put on his wrestling show to make it look like it's something that's cool and hip. Earlier today, Brian Cox was running up and down the steps and refused to tell John Sally who his partner was. Now, I say Brian Cox was running up and down the steps. In theory, Brian Cox was running down the steps. I just kind of assumed he had to go up the steps at some point to get up them.
He was doing stadiums around the impact zone, so that's what he was doing.
Allegedly. AJ Styles versus Abyss in a tables match. Now, AJ makes his entrance wearing his vest with the hood, and I thought he was wearing a light-up vest, and I'm like, I got no memory of that. Turns out the reason why I don't remember him having a light-up vest is because he didn't have one. Instead, I saw the green lasers dancing off the back of his vest and thought it was a light-up jacket.
Those are the best lasers in wrestling history. Glacier.
They did a fantastic spot, I thought, where Abyss goes for a back body drop, but AJ jumps on his shoulders and does a springboard off of Abyss's shoulders into a Hurricanrana, which, AJ Styles and Abyss, it doesn't sound like it should be a good match, but they worked exceptionally well together.
Oh, yeah.
And we go to commercial because we could not cut out any of the unfunny skits we've seen so far to give us more AJ Styles. AJ hits a springboard 450 knee drop. Abyss hits the black hole slam, which is what I was referring to earlier, is legitimately one of my favorite looking finishers in wrestling history. I just like the way he spins them around and the opponent's legs are flailing around. It always looks really cool. And of course, when you get somebody small like AJ Styles, it looks even cooler.
Mm-hmm.
The finish saw Abyss set up AJ for a superplex, really. And I was in the middle of thinking the table was a bit too far out when AJ does a sunset flip power bomb to send Abyss through the table for the win. It may have only had like 3 minutes of TV time, but it was a fun 3 minutes of TV time.
Yes, it was. It's probably my second favorite match on the entire 2 days. This versus AJ versus Abyss is number 2. We already had the number 1.
Ultimate X?
Yep.
Okay. As long as you didn't say Puppet versus Tia.
No.
So Leanne interviewed Tom Arnold, whose feelings were hurt when Puppet called him fat. Leanne then interviewed Puppet, who was mad that Leanne sat on the steps of the tunnel to interview him. Leanne then made fun of him for being short, so Puppet got on a chair and gripped her up, and she was saved by Shane Douglas, who was not wearing a low-cut blouse.
He calls Puppet Big Man, and Puppet was taken aback by this. He said, "What did you call me?" I said, "Big Man." All right.
Yeah.
I'll get to the ring.
No one's ever called Puppet Big Man before.
At least Shane's smart. He knows not to agitate Puppet. Don West agitated Puppet, and he got beat up for it.
Yes. Well, then,
by the way, if you want to find out that, I think that's episode 4.
Something like that. If not, just go back and listen to the entire archive of shows. And I'm going to talk about our TNA archive. In case Cyndi and I talked about it back on episode 26, before she was even on the show, go back and listen to the entire Something Else archive. Available on almost all your favorite streaming platforms.
Now that's a plug.
Yes. Tom Arnold with Leanne Tweeden versus Puppet. Puppet tripped walking to the ring, and the match went downhill from there.
Because
Arnold,
John Sally interviews him beforehand, and he says, "I'm going to beat Puppet within an inch of his life, and he doesn't have that many inches to give up." Okay.
Arnold wore a Michael Strahan number 92 jersey, which was the number of double cheeseburgers that Tom Arnold ate before the match.
Or was that the amount of double bacon cheeseburgers Bobby Lashley forced Simon Dean to eat after his debut match?
Oh, now you're bringing out the obscurity here, and that was something. Mike Tenay, by the way, can never stop being Mike Tenay, as he philosophically breaks down this match to tell us why Puppet may have the advantage in this match. Ultimately, Mike Tenay did not take into account that Tom Arnold would cheat. He brings out linear Dub Cup champion Tio to beat Puppet's ass in what I wrote was a 2-on-1 babyface advantage on the heel, but in theory, this was another Puppet versus Tio match. And again, just to repeat what I said last week, Vince Russo has nothing to do with this show. He is not involved in the creative of the company. In fact, by the time the show airs, he's not even with the company anymore. Tio then pinned Puppet with a senton to win the match with Tom Arnold, who realized that this was the winning pinfall and jumped on top after the referee had counted to 2 already.
Can I give my score? Because one thing that we didn't do last week is give scores to matches because, But I actually gave scores for this week. I just want to go over the scores. I thought the flag match was 4 out of 10. AJ and Abyss was 7 out of 10. Guess my score for Tom Arnold versus Puppet.
-5 stars.
-5 stars.
Man, we did not set. Is that serious? Is that really?
Yeah, that's what I wrote down. -5.
Oh Lord! See, we're on the same wavelength here, Cindy. We're on the same wavelength.
It only took us 13 weeks.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get into something more interesting.
Brian
Cox, yeah.
Having an almost closed door meeting with his mystery partner. Why didn't the cameraman just open the door?
It's a TNA camera. They don't know how to do anything.
Then we get the WCW TNA moment of the year. And I don't even know who's at fault for this. Is it the Best Damn Sports Show Period's production team? Is it TNA's production team? I don't know.
No, it's Best Damn's.
Yeah, but again, nobody, like I said earlier that Jeff Jarrett allowed this, and that to appear on his show or appear on a show that's promoting his company. Nobody watched this show before it aired because they aired yesterday's Still to Come video. They aired a video telling us still to come, Puppet would wrestle Tio, and we'd also have the Ultimate X match.
That is Best Damn's fault.
But
because it was their promo. It wasn't anything shot at Universal.
I understand that, but it's like, it's 2 fucking weeks. Nobody at Fox Sports Net, nobody saw, like, did a once through of this show after it was done being edited.
They're also going through a bit of tumult right now because they had just lost Jim Rome.
The Best Damn Sports Show Period had Jim Rome, or Fox Sports Net had Jim Rome?
Fox Sports Net had Jim Rome because he did the last word. That segmented to Jim Rome is burning, and that got moved to ESPN at the 4:30 slot because I remember the block. It was in 2004 around this time. It was for a while. It was Jim Rome was burning, Around the Horn, Pardon the Interruption.
I do.
And apparently the trade was
Interruption.
Jim Rome for Max Kellerman. Because Kellerman had IMAX airing at 5 at this time, opposite Around the Horn.
And that's when Reali took over Around the Horn, because it used to be Max Kellerman.
Yep, because he and ESPN couldn't come up with a deal, so Kellerman was let go. He went to Fox Sports 1. He went to Fox Sports Net. Jim Rome came to ESPN.
Interesting. We then get a recap of the X Division Gauntlet match at Victory Road. Now, despite this being a recap of the X Division Gauntlet match at Victory Road, it was not important to show who actually won the X Division Gauntlet match at Victory Road. In fact, if you just watch this, you may have thought Jarrell Clark won, since the last thing they showed was Jarrell Clark doing the 630 headbutt to somebody. But no, Jarrell Clark did not win. Hector Garza won. But speaking of Jarrell Clark, he was out next to wrestle Sanjay Dutt, Shark Boy, Michael Shane with Tracy, and Petey Williams with Scott D'Amore in a 5-way X Division match. Tom Arnold joined the commentary desk, and due to his lack of racism, he was better this week than last week.
And he had plenty of opportunities because you had Jarrell Clark, you had Sanjay Dutt, you had Shark Boy, who in wrestling parlance is a Shark Man. Michael Shane, he could have just did jokes about Tracy, and Petey Williams, who is the only legitimate heel in this group.
I don't know. Michael Shane's a heel. Him and Kazarian did the run-in on Daniels last week.
Yeah, but they're lower end heels compared to Petey Williams, who is like one of the top 3 heels in the company.
I don't know if I would have said top 3 heels. Although now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know who the hell else would it be. But I don't know if I'd say that.
Jarrett, Abyss, Petey.
That I was thinking Jarrett and Abyss, but I don't know. Like Raven was still around, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash are now here, so any chance of Petey Williams being number 3, well, that's not happening.
Well, same with Abyss.
So this was all about everyone doing moves as fast as they could. Shark Boy bit Petey, Sanjay, and Tracy's ass. And to be honest, I can't blame him for biting Tracy's ass.
Nope.
They did do a commercial break in the middle, but this actually went almost 5 TV minutes, which made it one of the longest matches on these 2 Best Damn Sports Show period shows. This match was sloppy in spots. At one point, Petey, they do a version of the stacked up stupidplex. Petey gives Jarrell a superplex while Shark Boy does a sunset flip powerbomb to Petey. And Petey and Jarrell both took a few lumps when they landed. And then Petey won with a Canadian Destroyer. The whole point of this match was A, to give us the video game moves, but B, to give us the biggest video game move, the Canadian Destroyer, which was the coolest move in wrestling in 2004.
7 out of 10.
After the match, D'Amore tried confronting John Sally again, but got held back by Petey.
You could have done something at Turning Point, but I think they probably didn't want to pay John Sally.
Probably not. So up next, the Naturals came out for their match against Brian Cox and a mystery partner. Now we've been
we go.
We've been building this up for a week now. Who was Brian Cox's mystery partner? Well, we can argue whose fault it was for the fuck up in the production earlier. Best Damn Sports Show period did not play Monty Brown's music when Brian Cox came in. TNA played Monty Brown's music when Brian Cox came out, thus ruining whatever potential surprise there still was when Monty Brown then came out as the mystery partner. I note that when Cox tagged in, he jumped over the top rope, and then the Naturals, I don't know, I don't think the Naturals get the credit they deserve for being good, solid workers, because they made Brian Cox look like the, second coming of Hulk Hogan here. Cox uses a double clothesline and then puts a figure 4 on that was a better figure 4 than either The Miz or Hulk Hogan have ever done in their lives.
Yep.
Cox then does a better body slam than Chris Rose ever did. Before tagging out, Monty Brown tosses the Naturals to and fro before Brian Cox pins Chase Stevens after Monty Brown gave him the pounce. Neither Cox nor Chase Stevens were the legal men in the match. Not that.
And plus, there was some good ring awareness by Brian Cox, because when Monty Brown pounds Chase Stevens, he was in the ropes. Cox pulled him away to get the 3.
Yes. So, they were. Don West was doing the "you can tell he's a wrestling fan" thing. It's possible Brian Cox really was a wrestling fan.
He was.
Like, if you were to tell me, actually, I'd believe Tom Arnold was to a degree, but if you were to tell me any of the 5 of them were wrestling fans, it would be Brian Cox.
Oh, Brian Cox and Monty Brown were legit teammates and friends. Brian Cox knew what Monty Brown was doing in wrestling. So it made sense. And plus, this angle was just kind of a way for, hey, Monty, I'm a wrestling fan and all, and we got this show on the same channel as you guys are on with Impact. You think we could work a program or something together, maybe for a match or 2? And Monty Brown was like, yeah, we'll see. I'll see what I can do. So I guess a match between Monty Brown versus Brian Cox wouldn't have gone over so well. This is almost the time where Monty Brown had one of the worst matches in TNA history with Triton.
Oh, that's coming up at Destination X 2005. And
so it was made like Brian Cox would team up with Monty Brown as his mystery partner, and they would go with the naturals, who you said are good workers. Just like when they won the tag titles with Jimmy Hart, but then when Jimmy Hart left, they floundered. Shane Douglas was made their manager, and they floundered.
Yeah. And Shane Douglas was made their manager because Chris Candido was originally not necessarily their manager, but Chris Candido led a little bit of a weird stable with the Naturals and Lance Archer. And then Candido died, and that led to both Jimmy Hart becoming the manager and then Shane Douglas being the manager. It's like one had something to do with the other there.
At least
By the way,
won the tag titles with Jimmy Hart.
They actually won them before Jimmy Hart because they won them on the show that Candido helped them win, and then Candido died before it aired. Like that was really weird or screwy, I guess is a better way. By the way,
speaking of screwy,
well, before we get there, before I forget to mention this, last week I complained that on this entire show, only one time did they mention that they have a weekly show on Fridays called Impact. Well, I'd like to point out that they mentioned it twice on this show. So twice on this show, they told you basically, hey, if you like this, we have a show on Friday afternoon called Impact. You should watch it. So in that sense, it is twice as good as last week's show. But then in a show full of randomness, we get the most random ass thing in the world next.
Yup.
Leanne Tweeden is with Lex Luger,
who wasn't even in the company at this time.
Yeah. And I'm serious when I say this. Lex Luger, the total package. And by the way, this is a month after Lex Luger cuts the famous I don't know promo, but obviously well before that became a meme. But Lex Luger was supposed to talk about 6 sides of steel. Instead, Lex Luger took off his football jersey and began posing. I don't know what Lex Luger got paid for this appearance, but I want that job. Whatever Lex Luger got paid is at least that much more than he earned doing this promo.
Lex Luger is probably working pay per appearance. Probably $3,000.
And I would say this is Lex Luger's last appearance on national wrestling television, but it's not. Because TNA brings him back in 2006 for a one-off. Actually, they bring him back a couple times during the Sting-Jeff Jarrett rivalry.
Which makes sense because, okay, spoiler alert for 2003, and we will talk about this.
Oh my God. When they brought him in after Elizabeth died.
After Elizabeth died, and it was Jarrett and Luger. Luger was working a program with Styles.
Yes. AJ Styles and Lex Luger were having a program.
And then it culminated in the first year anniversary show of TNA.
Oh, no. It's later than that. It's like November.
November?
Yeah.
Oh, right, because
it's after AJ loses the title.
Right. Okay, now that I have the timeline right. This was during the time when a certain movie was being shot. So this match happened. But it was Lex Luger and Jeff Jarrett versus AJ Styles, ... and Sting.
What movie are you talking about?
The Moment of Truth.
Oh. I managed to avoid that movie ever happening. But yes.
They shot it. They shot the wrestling scenes for that movie during a TNA the TNA taping. So Sting wrestled a match with AJ against Luger and Jarrett. Sting and AJ won. Also Puri's.
I'm pretty sure Lex Luger also cost AJ the tag team titles that he held with Abyss, which makes no sense, but somehow that has stuck into my head and sounds right.
That was September, October 2003.
We're gonna have so much to talk about over the next 2 years.
Oh yeah.
By the way, we're down to the last 104 weeks of this show because the last TNA Weekly pay-per-view is September 8th, 2004. So I would say the last 104 episodes, but they skip a few weeks here and there, so it's pretty much the last 100 at this point.
Oh, don't worry. We'll have filler for the weeks. Well, we'll have filler for some of the weeks. There will be some weeks we will take off. Christmas weeks we will take off.
Yeah. I haven't told you this already, but I've already decided we're not doing a fill-in week on Christmas and New Year's Day.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I know you were excited to record a show on Christmas Day talking about Jeff Jarrett as the NWA champion, but yeah, no.
No, I was going to suggest something for New Year's. Maybe that 2009 Knockouts New Year's special.
That 4-hour show. See,
never mind. Moving on. I thought that was shorter than 4 hours. Let's go to the main event.
I thought you were going to talk about that 30-minute New Year's 2006 show, which was Christian announcing Sting debuting with him versus Jarrett and Monty Brown at Final Resolution, and then America's Most Wanted versus AJ and Daniels. Which, by the way, now that I talk about it, that may actually be a fun idea.
Okay.
But yeah, we got 3 months to figure that one out.
Yeah.
So Jeff Jarrett versus Jeff Hardy in a 6 sides of steel match. Dusty Rhodes joined the announce desk, and I wasn't sure at first if he'd be better or worse than Tom Arnold was. And it's important to note that he was, in fact, better than Tom Arnold. So, no, Dusty Rhodes was not the worst commentator in wrestling history.
Nope, that honor still goes to Mark Madden.
Oh, God. Thankfully, we're not watching Nitro. This is about as good as Nitro. But the match starts with them in the cage, and immediately Jeff Jarrett leaves the cage so they could do crowd brawling. Legitimately, this is every single fucking Jeff Jarrett TNA world title match.
That's what I have written down. Typical Jarrett main event, but without interference, so it was decent.
I was honestly because I just figured Kevin Nash and Scott Hall came in for the finish, but that did not happen. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a Jeff Hardy match if he didn't dive off something high. And I guess the positive news on this is he did it in increments. He started on a 5-foot wall that he dove onto Jeff Jarrett. They finally get back into the cage. Hardy had green paint all over him, which meant that Jeff Jarrett had green paint all over him within a few minutes. Jarrett pulled out a foreign object, which until the end of the match, I had no idea what the hell it was, but it turned out to be a chain. But referee Rudy Charles would not let him use a chain here in the steel cage match that began with crowd brawling. Hardy missed the whisper in the wind. Jarrett got on the figure 4, but it got reversed. Hardy hits a twist of fate. Jarrett hits the #1 move in TNA history, which I said mockingly, and then Don West said it for real. Anyway, Hardy kicked out. He hits a senton, but pulls up Jarrett after a 1 count so he could do a flatliner? When the hell has Jeff Hardy ever done a flatliner? But
got me.
Apparently now, and the flatliner somehow bumped the referee here in this cage match. And as we mentioned earlier, Jeff Hardy's in a match, so he must jump from something high. So he goes to the top of the cage and does a senton. You know, there's a reason why the senton is only the #2 greatest move in TNA history, because Jeff Jarrett moved out of the way. And instead of Jarrett just putting his arm over him, Jarrett had to get the chain and knock Hardy the fuck out and pin him for the win. Thankfully, the referee had to be bumped here in this cage match so Jarrett could use a foreign object.
That's the classic TNA. However, I do want to talk about something. And
AJ Styles falling from the ceiling on top of Jarrett?
No. This has to deal with Jeff Hardy.
Okay.
How is it like every single big match that he was in before he actually won the title of like 2000 at Survivor Series 2008 or Armageddon 2000? Okay, Armageddon 2008. He always has the confliction. I could win the match. I just hit my finish. Or remember Money in the Bank 2007?
Yes, he dove off something high.
I could do something cool, but everybody's out. I could get the briefcase and win. I could get the title shot I've been fighting all my career for. I could do something awesome. I could win the match. I could do something awesome. Something awesome! And it kills him. And he loses the match because of it. It always happens. It is a trope. Like, I don't know if there's a big list of wrestling tropes out there, but something awesome versus actually winning the match needs to be a trope, and Jeff Hardy is the face of that trope.
He is the poster boy. By the way, Survivor Series 2008 was a show with a storyline so wacky that TNA did their best impression of it 2 months later. That was the show where it's supposed to be Triple H, Jeff Hardy, and Vladimir Kozlov in a triple threat match for the WWE Championship. Jeff Hardy was found unconscious in a stairway in the middle of the night, which WWE.com reported as legitimate. Because Jeff Hardy has had a history of drug abuse and things like that, real news sites picked up on it, and it turned out to be a wrestling angle. And that then led to Jeff Hardy not being at the arena. So the Triple H Vladimir Kozlov match happened for like 15 minutes. And then Vicky Guerrero, who's the SmackDown general manager, comes out and announces that Edge is now the third participant in the match. And as Edge is getting ready to win the match, out comes Jeff Hardy, who is now woken up and has appeared at the arena just in time for the finish of this match. Now, TNA did not quite go that far, but TNA had their own ridiculous moment where 2 months later, the Genesis 2009 show, the world title match was Sting versus Rhino. But they did a storyline where in the middle of the night, the main event Mafia abducted Rhino, took him out into the outskirts of Charlotte where the pay-per-view was, and beat him half to death and left him there. Rhino then picked himself up, dusted himself off, and walked from the outskirts of the city to the arena in time for his world title match, made even more ridiculous by the fact that he arrived at the arena wearing a ripped hoodie and his wrestling gear, which started my trope that Rhino doesn't own any real clothes, just a hoodie and his wrestling gear.
And that trope has been right for the next 15 years.
Yes. Like, legitimately, have you ever seen Rhino wearing real clothes?
Nope.
I met Rhino once, but I don't think I ever brought that up. And now that I think about it, I don't remember if he was wearing real clothes or just his gear and a hoodie. I'll have to look up that picture.
All right.
But by the way,
anyway,
AJ Styles fell from the roof. I mean, that next as much as anything else, because suddenly AJ Styles is on top of Jeff Jarrett. Where did this man come from?
Magic.
I mean, I'm assuming he didn't really fall from the roof, but suddenly Jeff Jarrett is celebrating and AJ Styles has fallen on him. And
they're building off that feud, which is happening because when Styles came in to save Jeff Hardy, he got blasted by Jarrett, Hall, and Nash.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to the match at Turning Point, which is Jarrett, Hall, Nash versus Jeff Hardy, AJ Styles, and Macho Man Randy Savage.
In Macho Man Randy Savage's last match ever. And I mean, hey, if we review this in 2 years, then we review it in 2 years. But Randy Savage gets laid out before the match, and it was a 3-on-2 handicap match until the last 20 seconds of the match. So, just saying. But anyway, Jarrett tries leaving the cage, but AJ follows him. But instead of watching AJ beat up Jeff Jarrett some more, we go to the top of the ramp where the Best Damn Sports Show people wrap up the show. But Puppet comes out and tackles Tom Arnold, and they roll down the ramp. So this feud must continue.
Nope.
The only way this show could have been saved is if suddenly they popped up and yelled April Fools like Tom Arnold was getting into a fight with Michael Strahan or something. Do you remember that?
Oh, God, that was the 2000. That was a legitimate April Fool's joke for Best Damn. However, Tom and Strahan didn't tell any of the main crew about it.
I think Chris Rose knew about it, but nobody else did, including the people working production. Because the other people, and I don't know who the hell else was on the show because the panelists had changed. Because this was Tom Arnold had left, and he was coming back to plug his book, which wasn't real, but it was to tell the real stories behind the scenes of the Best Damn Sports Show period. And this led to him and Michael Strahan getting into a fight. Oh, Lord.
That we need a. You know how we always have these stories about various shows from the past? Like there's a good one about Tough Crowd. There's a good one about American Gladiators and Guts, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I want one for Best Damn Sports Show, period, with all of the craziness that happened during that show's run.
I thought you were going to say we need to do a podcast going week by week through the Best Damn Sports Show period, which was a daily show. So every week we would review the one episode of the Best Damn Sports Show period. That I think we would, quit after like 3 episodes.
Right. I will say I remember recording some of the things you wouldn't say 2 bits. They did Keyshawn Johnson one day. And if you remember the history about Keyshawn Johnson, like he would get a whole bunch of yards, but he wouldn't score. Which led to one of my favorite ones. Hey, Keyshawn, it's called the zone diet, not the end zone diet, jackass.
Interesting. That sounds like it could have been funny.
And that show is responsible for releasing Stephen A. Smith onto the world.
Oh, God. This is another reason to hate this show. I hate Stephen A. Smith for the same reason I don't like Corey Graves. I don't like being yelled at while I'm watching wrestling. Did I lose you there for a second?
No, I think you're absolutely 100% correct. I can't stand Corey Graves. I never did stand Corey Graves.
Oh, Lord. Do you think Bryan Danielson ever forgave, or do you think Justin Roberts ever forgave Bryan Danielson for Bryan choking him with a tie?
I think it was Justin Roberts' idea.
I was going to say, I guess, it's water under the bridge since Michael Cole works with Wade Barrett, but I guess when Nexus came out, Michael Cole ran for the hills. So, yeah. Although, to be fair, Brock Lesnar did beat the shit out of the entire announce team the night after WrestleMania, giving us like an hour and a half with Byron Saxton by himself, which what I like that was a bad last hour of a show as a live event, but I can't imagine watching it with Byron Saxton doing solo commentary.
Byron Saxton doing commentary during Austin 316 Day during the pandemic.
That I've chalked up to just them being like having no idea what the hell to do with the pandemic, which was hilarious because in the build to WrestleMania, they spent like 2 hours on every show just airing old shit, which was great. But then it was funny because after WrestleMania, then it's like, okay, now time for 3 hours of new shit. I'm like, now's the time when I'd rather be watching 2 hours of old shit on Raw every week.
And then you had, and I think this is where AEW kind of took advantage of the situation because they treated like, you know what? It's the pandemic. We can bulk record stuff. Hey, why don't we throw it back? Let's do old school NWA style programming. So they shot it in the Nightmare Factory in Atlanta.
I was gonna say, wasn't it in like Georgia?
Yeah.
Like they taped like 6 weeks of stuff. And
Yeah, 6-7 weeks in Atlanta. And it looked like you were watching World Championship Wrestling from like 1986.
that was during the famous feud between Chris Jericho and Pineapple Pete.
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, so maybe one day we'll get to TNA AEW 2020. But until that day. So yeah, next week we're back to the TNA Weekly Show, September 18th, 2002. I hope you've enjoyed the loss of our sanity the last 2 weeks. And before we go, Cyndi, do you want to plug anything or let the fine people know about anything?
Yeah, both of these shows are up on YouTube. Check them out if you have any morbid curiosity. They do have, I would say check out the second show, mainly for the X Division match, AJ versus Abyss, and oddly enough, the Naturals, Brian Cox and Monty Brown match, which was pretty decent.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, I had just put up on the Game Show Gumbo YouTube channel a review of the home version of Password Plus, where me and my brother's Zeronian Entity on Twitch actually did Alphabetics, which is the bonus game for Password Plus.
Yes. And don't you have a new YouTube channel?
Yes, the GSG Archive, where I will post shows not up on YouTube yet.
Yes.
Like full episodes of game shows. Because people have been bugging me to do that for years. I finally acquiesced and did it.
I'd be like, and I know, like, who am I to say anything here? Because God knows I do this all the time myself. I'd be more worried about the copyright strikes if you were to put it up on your actual channel.
That's why I created the separate channel.
Yes. By
so
the way,
that gets made. The original channel is unaffected.
I am subscriber number 69.
Nice.
Yes. All right, so that's going to do it for this week's episode. Thank you to everyone for listening. Hooray, my computer stayed intact for this show. And we'll talk to you again in 7 days.